think we're live here. Okay, everyone, welcome to the first episode of The Trip with Matt McKibbin. We're all Stardust, and The Trip with Matt McKibbin is a podcast that takes you through the trip we call our universal experience. Together, we're going to explore the exponential and positive impact of innovative technologies, both social and technical, that are being created every single day. And it's been a while. I've been kind of scheming this podcast for about a year now, going over all the different ways and people that I wanted to interview and the concepts. And I think that the COVID, the coronavirus pandemic that we're experiencing here has trapped everyone in their houses, in their rooms, and it's allowing a lot of people to be more productive, even though there's a lot of pain and hardship in the economic stuff. And so for today, the first episode, I wanted to bring on Max Borders here and talk a little bit about social evolution, talk about social singularity, and the concepts behind that, but also the practical applications that we're seeing happen at an exponential rate every single day in society. And I started seeing this as soon as everything got locked down and said, wow, this is a concept that Max Borders started to describe in his book and wrote several blog posts. And so I wanted to bring him on to describe the philosophical and context and where we are, and then kind of go into some of the details of how these things are actually appearing in our universe today. So welcome, Max Borders. Thank you for coming on to the first episode.
Thank you very much for having me.
And for our listeners, I'd love to get a little bit of background about yourself, where you come from, why you wrote the book, Social Singularity. I had the pleasure of helping to proofread a version of that, and would love to get a little bit of background on yourself. So if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Sure. I guess that my background is such a tortuous path back to my roots in North Carolina. So if you detect a little bit of an accent, that's the Piedmont, North Carolina accent. But ever since growing up in the Piedmont of North Carolina, from Charlotte, I've taken a path that includes philosophy, technology, and really how these blend and harmonize. I'm endlessly fascinated by systems and how people, real people, living, breathing flesh and blood people can self-organize in systems to positive effect. And I think we'll talk a bit about that today.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for the background. Yeah, the accent, I moved to Austin about a year ago, and I started saying y'all a little more. And so it rubs off on you, not all bad. So I guess kind of we'll go a little bit into the current events, right? We've seen a pandemic strike our universe, our planet here in 2020. It started in we think it started in Wuhan. We don't know exactly the origins of that, but we know that it's spreading. We have the tools to track the spread of a virus such as this through humanity. We have the open source tools of genetic testing and uploading the genetic code of the virus once it's been tracked. And then very quickly we can kind of see with our online tools exactly where everything is happening. So this, as most exponential curves, it starts off really, really, really slow and then really rapidly. And we're seeing that. So any comments on what this is or where we are in the world from this? Just a little bit of background on your brief comments on that.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot of things going on at once. I mean, right now we're really at a critical moment between, I guess, among three. Well, there are a lot of confluent forces. Okay. on the one hand, you have this very understandable and very deliberate response of people to look to authorities to fix things, to swiftly coordinate action. For example, to get people to self-quarantine or to get people to isolate themselves or to social distance. There's probably going to, and depending on which country you're in, there's a mix of sticks and carrots that authorities use to get people to social distance. So we're in that phase right now. Mm-hmm. There is also, people are looking to authorities for, the appropriate measures to take for example, getting test kits or to get things passed and expedited through the approvals process for vaccines and the like. This has been onerous in many countries and has been botched in others. It's been done in a better way, but it's exceedingly difficult to rely on these, what you might think of as choke points or central authorities that become top heavy, unwieldy, bureaucratic. And so sometimes sometimes it might be necessary to have top-down measures, but in other cases it may actually work at odds with what your goals are. So then there's these bottom-up processes that are happening concurrently, and a lot of people aren't super aware of them because they're less visible. I mean, we're aware of them in little pictures, little evidence being shared on social media, for example, but right now, there's this massive collective intelligence accreting around this problem. People are sharing ideas. People are coming up with vaccines and cures and talking to each other from their isolation. But this is as you put it, an exponential curve going on in terms of rapid collective intelligence around solving one problem. So I'm not here today to say that either approach is necessarily bad, but to the extent that one approach suppresses the other, we need to be very careful, because the long-term ramifications, and indeed the short to medium-term ramifications, can be very serious for how we respond, how we employ collective intelligence, and how we develop learning systems instead of bureaucratic top-down processes, for example.
I like that. I like that perspective on the general concept, because we're seeing that kind of mix. So one of the reasons why I wanted to bring you on was this concept of social evolution and social singularity. And so I was actually using them a little bit. I don't know if I was using them in the proper context, but I was using social evolution as the process of us kind of becoming the social safety nets and becoming the mutual aid systems. And then the social singularity is kind of that point in the future when those systems are replaced the top down hierarchical centralized one. So if you want to give your definition kind of what these are, you wrote a book on social singularity, and then the organization is social evolution. But that was my kind of like internal context for them. But yeah, if you can tell us what those are in your words, that'd be great.
Yeah, no, I think that was a really good sketch to start. It's actually quite good. If you think of the technological singularity as a point in the future where the idea is that the doubling of processing power and computing power will reach a point where strong AI instantiates and the machines, as it were, will wake up, right? So you've heard of the technological singularity. Mm-hmm. But the idea of the social singularity is a process whereby that runs in parallel, where the lateralization and coordination of individual actors in a system passes from more and more, it's almost like an inflection point between hierarchical states of affairs, where there are very few people at the top running, issuing commands and tasks to subordinate nodes or people in the network, in the hierarchy, and that lateralization process is, there's an inflection point where there's much more lateralization and coordination among individuals in a networked state of affairs. We pass from centralization, for example, to distributed systems to decentralized systems. That inflection point, I think of it as more of a point of no return, because the network state of affairs is so powerful when it's finally instantiated. And so I call that the social singularity. It's the point where we're able to coordinate and align incentives around either specific goals, for example, or even just a generalized state of being where we connect and collaborate with each other in real time without so much top-down coordination. That is the basic gist of the idea of the social singularity. And social evolution are the protocols, ideas, and processes that lead up to that point. It's how we evolve our behaviors, our personal and even spiritual outlook and state of being to this effect, but also the rules in which we find ourselves, the rules and protocols that we operate within that will give us an ordering function that's different, that's an emergent ordering function. Emergence being the outcome of collaboration and coordination among people without design or a central direction.
Right. So that's the really, really good definition of kind of the evolving of everything. Yeah, emergent is the bottom up, is the market, if you will. People are doing business with each other, trading, organizing, but without saying, okay, well, you go do this, you go do this, you go do this.
Yeah, exactly.
I love that.
And nobody's telling the people to get together to, like, for example, my friend here in Austin, Tarun, and his buddies are all software developers.
Mm-hmm.
So they're developing a COVID-19 tracing app. They just decided to do that. They're stuck at home. We're working on other projects, but they're spending time during the day, and they're networking with people in Slack channel, for example, around the world to work on this tracing app. It could be an abortive effort, but this is the kind of uncoordinated activity that gives rise to so many innovations and so many positive outcomes, even for this crisis.
Yeah, people solving them. I saw one that they're instituting in the Czech Republic that they actually ended up getting the government approval because they all built it. They used the telecom data. You can call into a call center and say, hey, I have it, and I was at these 10 places, and then they cross-references it to your GPS location, and then they go coordinate and talk to other people that were in the room with you. They're attempting to, try to get that done, whether, all the HIPAA laws and everything will be in place, the kind of top-down frameworks that we have for now, but we'll hold it back. I don't know, but it's that kind of coordination. And so that was the kind of one concept. We obviously have now like money networks and governance networks that are starting to emerge as well, blockchain and crypto. Do you want to, did I lose the video there? What other ones are you seeing kind of going on that are helping the this lateralization movement?
Yeah, forgive me. There was your listeners will be interested in the fact that they're probably aware that right now there's a lot of network traffic as people are stuck at home and doing this very kind of thing or watching Netflix or whatever. So there could be interruptions to our discussion because of that, but that just makes this really contextualized the importance of these networks in this time. I think I heard that what you asked was for some examples of this coordination lateralization process, this social evolution that's unfolding, but even prior to the crisis. Is that more or less what you asked?
Yeah. Which ones were happening before that? It was always kind of like criticized by creating, with Voice and Exit or Future Frontiers. Which ones were happening prior to that? And then we can kind of go into a little bit more of the ones that we're seeing in the modern day.
It's strange because I think the old example that people used to flog a lot, but it's been a long time now since it seems like it's been with us for so long that we actually take it for granted. But among the first examples would be like Uber and Kickstarter. These are not decentralized at the level of the network or at the level of the technology stack, but they are certainly processes for coordinating distributed or decentralized behavior. And very early, early in the teens here, we started seeing these kind of developments come about, and technology enabled those. The idea that you could catch a ride with a stranger safely was completely taboo prior to 2013, and and so that really set off an era of similar projects. Then, of course, the crypto movement, which you may have mentioned in the dark space, where people started experimenting with actually decentralizing and lateralizing development in the technology stack. Also interesting. The first instantiation of that on a blockchain being Bitcoin. That is an interesting example, not only in terms of how people use Bitcoin, but how people around the world contributed to its construction and maintenance. Mm-hmm. Very, very difficult to shut down. Very, very difficult to find a single point of failure. The thing about these robust learning networks is that single point of failure isn't available. In a hierarchy, when the central authority fails, the entire system has catastrophic failure. But in robust learning networks, there is no single point of failure. There are multiple nodes that can coordinate according to protocols. This has really unleashed a new era of thinking about how we organize ourselves as people. Those are a couple of examples. There might be others, but
yeah, definitely. I mean, well, we're even seeing today like GoFundMe campaigns and
right.
kind of Kickstarter campaigns for anyone that needs something, healthcare resources, and those as well. What about like
proto mutual aid? Really, GoFundMe. It's the first instantiation of the renaissance of mutual aid. GoFundMe is a good example of that.
And so, for our listeners, what is the renaissance of mutual aid?
I am an optimist about the future of mutual aid. The mutual aid societies and movement of the night. This is old is new, right? Mm-hmm. Around in the 19th and 20th centuries, 20th century being really the end, or the nadir at least, of the mutual aid movement. These were started though way back in time, for centuries. The mutual aid movement enjoyed about a 300-year run, where a couple of centuries of golden years. As humanity was moving into the industrial age from the agrarian age, there was this real sense of the need to pull together to aid each other. It was the social safety net, but it was in a rudimentary way decentralized. So people would join these lodges, these societies, all manner of different organizations where you lock arms in solidarity and help. You not only help your sister or brother to be picked up when they fall, but you can hope that someone will pick you up when you fall as well. And these mutual aid networks, 1 in 3 Americans, for example, and they were even more profound in the UK in the last centuries, but 1 in 3 Americans at the height of the mutual aid age were a member of one of these societies. So that's like a whole third of the population belonged to one of these. And they really, some were segregated by race and all of the crap that that in the history of the United States that is ugly was also present in these societies, as white people and even like women would come together sometimes, or men would come together. Sometimes you'd have them segregated by sex, segregated by race. And other times not so much. Nevertheless, the idea of fraternity has been utterly lost with basically the rise of corporate insurance and more importantly, the welfare state, the centralized welfare state. And it's not to say that these two forces have been an unalloyed bad. It's simply to say that mutual aid has been lost. And in the process, our sense of fraternity and compassion for each other in a more direct ways as a participatory practice has also been lost with it. I think right now we're starting to see flashes with this crisis that a renaissance in mutual aid is probably in order. And certainly if our central authorities run out of money and we have a sovereign debt problem, as the United States is heading for, like Greece did in 2009, then mutual aid, we may need to put those structures together as rapidly as we did the response to COVID-19.
Right. And yeah, the centralized ones are printing money, trillions of dollars going to banks, interest rates at zero, treasuries at negative, but the very, very little like mutual aid that's going on from the top down. There might be a couple $1,000s coming your way if you're a person, or family, but
Yeah.
compared to the larger top down ones, and I think of kind of like the guilds, even on like online kind of marketplaces and games and things. I think of that kind of as you're part of a guild. You are, no matter what, that guild is going to take, help you in any way that they can. And you have more control over the resources that are given to those people versus just kind of a handout. You can say, hey, cool, you need to come, stay with us, or you need to come like help me work my business and I'll take care of you, and get them back on their feet.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, really, and this is not we shouldn't spend this time poo-pooing the welfare state
No,
because
no.
it's done a lot of good for a lot of people. But in terms of what you might call local knowledge, okay,
Mhm.
understanding the people you're helping and the implications of that assistance is critical to the mutual aid point of view. It's like, if I know that someone has a certain kind of problem, and by virtue of this problem, their habits and practices or lack of ethic or whatever, if the community sees that this person has lost their job for that reason, it may be that the cure to that problem is a change of behavior, not necessarily merely supporting them. Dropping checks from helicopters on people is not
Don't get
always
your
the best
money.
way to help them. And I
Right.
know I probably sound to some listeners like some kind of heartless Republican, but what I'm trying to say is that there's been an imbalance. And if we think of systems like universal income or other similar systems, we need to also think about the implications of how those funds are to be dispersed and in communitarian fashion, because
Mm-hmm.
it really is this local knowledge and this knowledge of each other that makes it such that we can actually be assistance to people, and not, for example, make them just dependent, or maybe even, as is happening with our entitlement system, sending us headlong into economic collapse.
Right. Right. It's the governance of those funds with the local knowledge and I always start the conversation by like saying, like, social safety nets are really important in society, and I
Yeah.
want social safety nets. And it's just how do we make them so the incentives work properly?
and,
Um,
and, and an anti-fragile system, right?
yeah, right,
To use Taleb's term, it's fragility is to some extent comes in that single point of failure we were talking about. And if there's one single point of failure for the social safety net, everything is catastrophic, right? But if we have a network, a loving network even, of people in mutual aid, even if we can make sure that the incentives align such that at least that mutual aid can coexist with the welfare state as such, we may have a chance if the welfare state does indeed collapse.
right, and even replace that in the sense that if it ends up being better and more effective, then people won't necessarily go to a welfare state. They'll just go to their community because they know it can be more effective, and kind of like bottom up replace it in a large way.
Yeah, that's
Uh,
right.
so I want to shift gears a little bit here, and talk about some of the ones that are going on now. And so I don't know, I shared some of these with you, but for listeners and like kind of the inspirational and positive ones that are going on now. So like the first one I have on here is was created called in telehelp. And I can share, I guess, my screen, or I don't know how to do that here. I don't know. We'll just IntelliHelp public group. I can put this in the show notes. But IntelliHelp is something on Facebook that is called Love Delivered, and you basically the premise of it is, if you have an ask, you're in a community anywhere in the country, probably in the world, and you need something during this time, you can post where you are, what you need, and there's a group of people that can respond. And money is not of an issue. Who pays for it is not an issue, but their job as a collective is to help you get what you need. So if you need masks, if you need food, if your child is in the hospital and you need some support, in terms of talking or any of that, you can post on this a video or a request. There's someone here that said that they're pregnant and they lost their job as a waitress. Like, how can I get help, right? And local community can respond with that. And so when I saw this is exactly what I thought of when I thought of the social singularity or the mutual aid societies, but on a collaborative network like Facebook. This page with, I forget how many, I think there's 31,000 members on here already. And it's only been around for a couple of weeks. So this is one of the ones that I'm just like, yes, this is Max's concept of the social singularity happening in action.
Well, and that's beautiful. I'd not even heard of that one, and I'm heartened to hear that this is happening. I mean, everything from the research response in terms of I guess it would be sequencing the virus, understanding its properties, coming up with vaccines, to how we can help each other, all of these forms of collective intelligence are quickly bubbling up. Now, it's not to say that there's not shit flying around in the networks.
Right.
There absolutely is. But the extent to which quality information can be transmitted through these networks and received, most importantly, received by the appropriate parties who can take action in a distributed way, that is the critical essence of a learning system that that can transmit both information and indeed love. I know that sounds strange, that we transmit love through networks, but it sounds like in their marketing copy, they're already doing that. And, going forward, we're going to have to be able to be more trusting with each other as a society, but we're also going to have to be able to develop trust mechanisms. And so in my discussion in a paper I wrote a while back called How We Become the Social Safety Net, I discussed the idea of human fractals, which is to say that we in a very dynamic way can check each other in terms of the veracity of our claims about need, or the veracity of our claims about problem, or our capability of giving assistance to someone locally can be have metadata associated with it, so that we know that, and this would be, I don't want to scare people, but the dynamics here could be similar to, rating systems where you have a reputation and you accrue reputation in time. You want to guard that reputation. Yep. The Chinese have a centralized social credit system that is based on a specific state set of guidelines, but you can have voluntary social credit systems that may indeed help with this idea of human fractalization. So if we don't get too draconian and we don't get too authoritarian in architecting these systems, as long as they self-organize and you can opt out of them, I think they can be very healthy social credit systems that are voluntary, and that these will map onto this idea of human fractals and social aid.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, everything that you would do would like creating these open source systems, creating, helping your neighbor, helping that would all give you more social credit, reputation. I always said, you mentioned the Uber of like summoning a stranger from the internet. Back in the day, it was, don't trust people from the internet and don't trust strangers, don't get in their cars. And now we can literally summon a stranger from the internet and get in their car. Because of these reputation systems that we've built on the internet. Another one that I really, one of the biggest problems with our medical system right now is if we don't flatten the curve, if we don't social distance, is that lots of people will get sick really fast, and it will
Yeah.
overwhelm the medical systems. And we're seeing that in Italy, in France, in London, and starting to see it here in larger
Switzerland is
cities,
bad. Spain is bad. Yeah.
LA, New York, things like that. And so ventilators are one of the things that are limited. So keeping people alive when they have tremendous, like terrible pneumonia. And so we're seeing open source ventilator projects come about
3D
where people
printed. Yeah.
are 3D printing all the pieces that they need for a ventilator system and innovating. So Bruce Fenton is one of the ones that really called for this, and he's got endcoronavirus.org, and there's a couple different Medium posts where they're giving updates. They're collaborating through Slack, through WhatsApp, through Medium and Twitter, and putting these plans up onto the internet so that everyone at home can print their own masks, their own ventilators, and then give it to the people in need, which is that collective action, like right in action, in my opinion.
Well, and we also have, you know, say what you want to about the billionaires. And by the way, I am no big fan of Elon Musk. Everybody's a big Elon Musk booster. I am not, but I will say that they have reconfigured different kinds of systems within, I think, Tesla Motors, to basically to produce needed things in this crisis time. And you know, same with Bill Gates. Bill Gates is getting out the testing kits. The woman here in town, Julia Cheek, who runs Everlywell, who has a COVID-19 testing kit coming out next week. If she's a billionaire after this, fine. You know, just let's make it happen.
Right. And I would, I like to say, like, my definition of a billionaire has changed from what it used to be. The definition of a billionaire used to be, hey, I've got $1 billion or more in my bank account or my equities and my portfolio. And I like to redefine it as someone who creates a positive impact on 1 billion people or more.
Wonderful.
And these people are, like, through this crisis, through these initiatives, you can have a very large impact on a very large number of people through creating these systems. And you don't necessarily have the money in your bank account or the equity. Now, Everlywell and Elon Musk and those people, I mean, I think they should be diverting resources.
Well, there's an interesting idea that sounds like an abstraction right now, but I want to try to unpack it a little bit in concrete terms. And it's Adrian Bujan's law of flow. It's called the constructal law. And the idea of the law of flow is that everything in the universe that lives is a kind of vascular system with very large rivers going through that are sort of like the roots and the trunk of any vascular system. And they go out to tributaries and finally to the peripheries, to the tiny, you know, either branches of the tree or, in the case of the brooks and streams, in a river system. Everything that lives is animated in this kind of flow system. So it's interesting that right now, the biggest companies in the world, the ones that we tend to want to hate the most, are the raging rivers. Amazon is a raging river right now of goods and services to people who are stuck at home.
Yep.
Google is a raging river of information where it needs to getting to where it needs to go. Microsoft, Apple has hardware that is allowing people to communicate in isolation and not complete isolation. You and I are talking right now where, you know, 50 years ago, there's no way in hell we would have been able to do this.
No way.
So, you know, the richest companies in the world that people want to take pot shots at, including me, don't get me wrong, I'm one of the first to say we need to do better. We need to have competitors. We need to do this and that. We need to be more distributed. But it's also that these large flow centers, these large raging rivers, are going to help get us through this crisis and are probably going to be even richer because of it. And that's going to be hard for people to take. but it's also, there could be mechanisms afterwards for through this more, greater collective intelligence, where we don't need these large central corporations anymore to do some of this stuff, that we can have, more tokenized or otherwise, cooperatives that emerge that are not so top heavy in terms of the way they're organized. But right now we're seeing that law of flow in action. And as the more we cut off of our interactions in the economy with these shutdowns, I'm very, very concerned. And I have to admit this, Matt, that the more we close these things down, the law of flow, because death, quite literally in the constructal law, is when flow stops.
Right.
And we are stopping flows on a massive scale right now to the tune of about $1 trillion a month. It's, and yet I don't want to say that we should stop. I just think that this retreat has to be temporary. We need to continue to improve our collective intelligence. And then we need to be able to act in coordinated ways to get people back to work safely as soon as possible. I don't purport to have all the answers on this, but I do want people to understand that that flow systems are sort of the lifeblood of civilization, and how we keep them going and how we improve them is going to mean a lot to the future of humanity going forward.
I agree with you. I think that those flow systems are, and I think we're going to improve upon the systems that we get resources out to the edge through this. We're going to have to come up with really innovative ways to improve resource delivery. We're going to use drones, for example, to deliver things. We're going to use automation to deliver packages and resources much more. We're going to get to test those types of things out where it may not have had the ability to do that if this, invisible tidal wave hadn't hit us, hit humanity there. And like a little bit of optimism here, during the plague, like bubonic plague, Shakespeare wrote, he ended up writing King Lear under plague quarantine, right? And Newton ended up writing his theory of calculus and optics under quarantine. And so
that's really interesting.
The concepts and the technological shifts that we're going to be able to have, because people are building things in their houses and they're focused and they have determination and they have resources and they say, okay, no, I'm not going to let this happen. I think are going to improve from that. We're going to actually optimize our ways of taking care of this in a technological way. Hopefully the regulatory structures kind of help us do that. Yeah, adapt, right? Adapt in that sense. Yeah. There was also a VC, David Frankel, who had a Twitter, outline, and he said, we're going to come up with like all kinds of crazy antiviral and anti-bacterial technologies that we wouldn't normally have. Like we're going to have all elevators and doors and faucets and handles go to like voice or hand-based gestures. We're going to make sure that we are all washing our hands and have like at the grocery store, we're going to have hand sanitizer there every time from now on out. There's never going to be a time when we don't have these types of that, temperature and you can, like in Hong Kong and in Asia, when you go into the country, they take your temperature through gauges so that you can't necessarily go in there, or not necessarily it's good to like quarantine people off. But if you're sick, you don't want to get everyone else sick. So like the biometrics and or if you have a employee coming in that's sick, right? And they don't even know that they have a fever. They're like, oh, well, I feel fine, right? So you can have those kind of metrics to better take a look at who's sick and what thing. I think we're going to come up with different types of insurance models because, the government can't just support everyone's sick leave forever. That's not going to be sustainable. So how do we improve our health insurance models, from a bottom up or from getting rid of those regulations? And so these are just some of the ones that I was really excited about reading his kind of tweet storm about on Twitter. And
Yeah,
It's
and it's funny because we kind of it's easy for people to fall back into old habits. So I'm wondering which of these conventions will stay with us. So for example, you see in Asia, it's very common for people to wear masks on public transit. Just about a year ago, I was in Japan, and I remember seeing people without any kind of shame or weirdness wearing surgical masks in public everywhere. They were just ubiquitous, and it was a very normal thing. And of course, some of the people were concerned about getting something, and other people were concerned about giving other people something. But
right.
somehow, some way in Asia, Korea, China, Japan, this ubiquity of mask wearing is quite common. And so they've adapted culturally to, problems of communicable diseases much more readily than we have. I'm wondering if we will also adapt that way. A lot of this is behavioral change. It's not just, a lot of this is simple stuff. Like maybe we start bowing to people instead of shaking their hands. Maybe we become not such a huggy culture. Maybe we,
Uh, I like
people,
giving hugs. I don't know. I hope that's not the case, but yeah.
it's funny. I commented to a friend of mine that, well, and also my baby mama I live with is Jewish, right? And so we talk about a lot about Judaica and the history of the Jews and the Jewish tradition. But the Mosaic laws were some of the most fantastic and rich things in the this rabbinical tradition associated with the Old Testament, and from that how these kind of norms and conventions lasted. And of course, you got the Egyptians were having all these plagues and things that have been mythologized in the literature, while the Jews had very simple practices before everybody else, like wash your hands before you eat,
Right.
or whatever. And these rules of thumb that were sacralized by the rabbis in the text and by the scribes became this way of inoculating yourself to some degree through cultural habit.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in modern times, we say, "Oh, that's silly. That's not God protecting you." That we understand germ theory now, but we still wash our hands, and we still have an association of that with religious practice. It's very important that we continue, in some sense, to respect the sacralization of cultures that will help us survive. And interestingly, the Jewish people did that, sort of better than anybody else. I mean, they gave us the golden rule, and they gave us
Mm-hmm.
wash your hands before you eat. And those are two pretty damn good things for human survival.
Absolutely. And the cultures that have those moving forward and that embed them into their values, whichever ones that help us survive, whether it's just, bowing or not hugging, I really hope it's not hugging,
I hope it's not hugging too. And
but
I hope it's just like, in the winter, we hug less. We bow
yeah,
in the winter. Maybe there's like winter bowing becomes a thing, or winter, high five from a distance. I don't know.
virtual, the namaste. There we go. Right.
Well, I mean,
The elbow
think
bump.
about the homosexual community in the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
Rapid adoption of condom use because of AIDS.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, in fact, not just the homosexual community, but they were the vanguard for the use of condoms in the 80s.
Right.
The heterosexuals trailed along too as they started getting AIDS, but that was a massive cultural change just based on what had become a widespread epidemic and problem in that community. And they associated it with being loving. Now that has since trailed off as pharmaceuticals have contained the HIV virus, and probably and in many ways that's a shame for both homosexuals and heterosexuals. However, it is proof that you can somewhat rapidly adapt your behavior and culture,
Mm-hmm.
that you don't need 1,000 years to do it. And that's very promising.
No, I think with the collaboration tools and the information technology tools that we have at our thing, we can, social distancing isn't fun. It's not the greatest thing in the world, but that's one of those things that we'll be able to do. We'll be able to make sure that it's the cultural norm to prevent us um, from injuring each other and spreading disease. Um, So this is my first show, and one of the things I want to do is give our first sponsor a shout out. And so I'm gonna take off my background here for a second, which uh, is this. And so if and Max, you've had a number of these different things. So Ama Healing is my company that I co-founded. It's a hemp wellness company, and it's designed to bring balance and homeostasis to everyone on the planet by providing the highest quality hemp products. And so if you haven't had a chance to try our CBD and hemp based, so CBD is just one of the 100 plus beneficial compounds found in our hemp oil and our extracts. So you can go to amahealing.co for those listening on there, check it out, and you can use discount code MATT to check it out and get a 15% discount on any of your order. We also have a new product coming out called Elevate, which is a alcohol replacement or alternative, and you get a mood enhancing buzz. You can add it, a beverage additive. You can add it to any beverage. You get a mood enhancing buzz within a couple of minutes. And if you do drink alcohol as well, whether you put it into a mocktail or a cocktail, you actually get it actually helps your liver detox function, and it's a neuroprotectant. So it'll help against a hangover if you drink too much. And you've had it a couple of times. We'll have to get you some more of those for coming on to the show. But I wanted to give that shout out to our first sponsor, Ama Healing, amahealing.co, and use discount code Matt for a 15% discount.
Hey, you know what? In a couple weeks, people are going to be stressed out, and I am perfectly willing to shill for products I believe in, and people are going to need CBD and other cannabinoids to cope probably in the coming months. And if you can be a provider of that as a flow system, please continue to do that and prosper, my friend. I think it's wonderful. I can't wait to use some more.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, it's really good. I mean, everyone's a little stressed. Everyone needs to kind of shift and get rebalanced sometimes, and kind of create it into your daily ritual. Helps you sleep, helps with that anxiety, and really appreciate it.
You know what? And this is your first episode. There's no reason you can't shift this part of the show to earlier in the episode. I encourage you to do that because you don't want people who trail off from boring people like me to miss the Ama Healing commercial, man.
All right, we'll make sure to put the Ama Healing commercial at the beginning.
Right on.
So I think this is a good kind of natural ending point here. Do you have any last statements that you'd like to get across? Any optimistic what do you see coming in the next couple weeks, months? How do we adapt? What's your final thoughts here?
Yeah, I would just encourage people. It's funny because I noticed lately that there's a lot of signal and noise out there, right? I want to. Jordan Hall is a real smart guy who I follow online sometimes. And one of the things that he says is it's just he has really simple rules of thumb sometimes. Sometimes they're dressed up in fancy language, but other times he has really simple rules of thumb. And that's basically really stay tuned to what's going on and see how you can be an active participant in share of understanding and sharing signal as opposed to noise in times of crisis. I've seen and heard a lot of comments on my posts and other people about quote unquote armchair quarterbacking. But if you disparage people from quote unquote armchair quarterbacking, if they're trying to share something that they, through deliberation, wisdom, and discernment, determined to be good information, or at least something to consider, right now is the time to keep our eyes and ears open about that information, using discernment to internalize it and then perhaps to share it, because that is how collective intelligence works at root from the human standpoint, on the human side. So we need to be open And if people are armchair quarterbacking and sharing bad information or false information, constantly evaluating our own inner states, our own sense of center and wisdom on the matter is the only way we're going to get through this and be good propagators of information. It's not to say we're perfect. It's not to say we're not going to fuck up and fail. All of us will at some point. Mm-hmm. But ultimately, if I could leave everybody with something, it's let's be more discerning, more wise, and more loving propagators of good information.
I like that. That's a really great thing. Be the moderator of your own information, sharing out to the network.
Absolutely. Oh, and find someone in your neighborhood you can help safely.
Mm-hmm. I love it.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, so one of the sign-offs that I'm experimenting with is, this is the Trip with Matt McKibbin, and it's my sign-off that I want to do every time is
put your world background back on.
Oh yeah, let's do that. Choose virtual background. I think this is
there it is.
There it is. All right. So, there's actually, I heard this, I'll give credit. Jamie Wheel was the first person to say this, and give him credit. I don't know where he got it necessarily, but there's 3 things that I know in this universe to be true. 1, we're all in space. 2, no one knows what's going on. And 3, I love you. Signing off.